Welcome to another edition of The Explainer. Let's jump right in. Today, we're looking at a totally famous event from ancient texts, the feeding of the 5,000. But listen, we're not just reading a classic story here. We're going to break this down as an absolute masterclass in overcoming a completely impossible logistical nightmare. I mean, how on earth do you feed a massive crowd with literally zero resources? We aren't talking about a busy dinner rush. We're talking about a pop-up city of 5,000 people. So the source material we're analyzing today gives us this profound look at scarcity, opportunity, and just unimaginable abundance.
To really get the weight of this text, I want you to put yourself right in the middle of the scene. Imagine you're stranded in a completely remote place. You're surrounded by thousands of people. The sun is going down, it's getting colder, and man, everyone is incredibly hungry. And here's the kicker. There are no restaurants, no grocery stores anywhere in sight. There is absolutely no human way to feed this massive crowd.
Which brings us to Section 1. An impossible problem. A logistical nightmare unfolds.
The text sets the scene near the Sea of Galilee. The crowd has been absolutely captivated by teachings all day, and the sheer overwhelming scale of this gathering is just staggering. Well over 5,000 men, women, and children. They traveled from all over, converging on this one remote spot. Just think about the massive caloric deficit here. It's literally a pop-up city totally cut off from the supply chains of any surrounding towns. Okay, so we've got a remote place, a setting sun, and a very hungry crowd. A major crisis is actively brewing. The disciples suddenly realize the dangerous reality of being this isolated. Evening is coming in fast, and a crowd this size getting hungry and restless in the dark miles from town? Yeah, that's a recipe for a complete disaster.
So, the disciples have a completely logical, totally human reaction to this crisis. They go to Jesus and offer the most sensible advice they can think of. Send the people away so they can buy something to eat. Basically, they're saying, look, let's outsource this problem. We do not have the resources for this, so let's disband the crowd while there's still daylight for them to go fend for themselves. Makes sense, right? But instead of agreeing with their super practical plan, Jesus hits them with this completely shocking command: you give them something to eat. I mean, imagine the dramatic tension right there. The text notes the disciples were absolutely stunned. Even if they pooled months of their own wages together, they couldn't possibly buy enough food to give everyone even a single bite. Humanly speaking, the demand was astronomically high and their supply was, well, effectively zero.
And this leads us directly to the turning point of our text. Section 2, 5 loaves, 2 fish, the tiny glimmer of hope.
In response to Jesus' command, the disciples frantically start taking inventory to see what food is actually around. And this perfectly illustrates that perspective of total scarcity versus massive demand. On one hand, you have thousands of hungry people who would need months of wages just to secure a basic meal. On the other hand, you have what the disciple Andrew actually managed to scrounge up: a young boy's small packed lunch, just 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. Andrew voices the exact doubt that literally any of us would have in that situation. But what are they among so many people? It perfectly captures the friction of that moment. The disciples are looking at the math, and the math says impossible. They only saw scarcity. They only saw limitations. But as the text reveals, Jesus looked at that exact same tiny lunch and saw an incredible opportunity.
Let's look at Section 3. The miracle unfolds, breaking the bread. What I absolutely love about this source material is just how methodical the whole process is. Jesus doesn't just toss food into a chaotic mob. He establishes order methodically. First, he instructs the thousands of people to sit down on the grass in groups across the hillside. Then he takes the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looks toward heaven, and gives thanks to God. Only after all of that does he begin breaking the bread and handing the pieces to the disciples to distribute. And this is where the physical logic of the universe just gets suspended. The core mechanism of the whole event is summarized in these 6 words. The food did not run out. As the disciples kept serving the people, walking back and forth, there was always more bread. There were always more fish. Again and again, they handed out the food, and the supply simply never ran dry. Crazy, right?
Which takes us to Section 4, 12 baskets left over, the aftermath of abundance.
The text is super clear that every single man, woman, and child ate until they were completely satisfied. Nobody went hungry. But the story doesn't just end with full stomachs. Jesus gives this really fascinating final instruction. Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted. I find this detail so incredible. Even right in the middle of a supernatural, limitless abundance of food, there's still this mindful care for resources.
Abundance in this text doesn't give you a free pass to be wasteful.
When the disciples followed that instruction, they collected the leftovers, and we get this staggering final data point: 12 baskets. They filled 12 entire baskets with leftover food. Just think about that contrast for a second. The miracle began with a lunch so small, a young boy was carrying it in his hands. It ends with a surplus so massive, it takes 12 large baskets to haul away. God's provision wasn't just adequate, it was exponentially greater than anyone could have imagined.
This brings us to Section 5, Why This Miracle Matters. 4 key takeaways.
The source text extracts 4 incredibly powerful lessons from this historical moment, starting with Lesson 1. God can use incredibly small things. A young boy's packed lunch probably seemed utterly insignificant when staring down thousands of hungry adults, but in Jesus' hands, it became the catalyst for something massive. It's a great reminder that what we might view as totally insignificant, when offered in faith, can actually become more than enough.
Moving on to Lesson 2. Focus on power, not limitations. See, the disciples were paralyzed because they were laser-focused on their limitations. They didn't have the money, they didn't have the supply, and they were stuck in a remote location. Jesus, however, focused entirely on God's power. This teaches us that when a situation seems humanly impossible, just shifting our focus from what we lack to what is actually possible can completely change the outcome.
Lesson 3 highlights a deep compassion for physical needs. It's pretty easy to read ancient religious texts and assume they're strictly about abstract spiritual truths. But this lesson shows us that Jesus deeply cared about the practical physical well-being of the people. His compassion actively moved him to intervene and feed a hungry crowd, proving that, physical needs matter immensely.
And finally, Lesson 4. Provision that exceeds expectations. Those 12 baskets of leftovers we just talked about, they perfectly illustrate this point. The provision didn't just meet the baseline requirement of stopping starvation, it went way, way beyond immediate necessity. The blessing overflowed to the point of a massive surplus.
So let's do a really quick recap to make sure we lock in these core insights. Number 1, God uses the small, seemingly insignificant things. Number 2, when facing limitations, remember that nothing is impossible. Number 3, true compassion addresses practical, physical needs. And number 4, true provision is overwhelmingly abundant.
Which brings us to our final thought. The source text concludes by reminding us that the same power to transform lives exists today. So I want to leave you with this question to really reflect on. Look at the resources, the talents, or the time you have right now, even if it feels like just 5 loaves and 2 fish. What could happen when you place what little you have into greater hands? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep looking for the opportunities hidden inside the impossible.